Thanks so much for tuning in to this conversation with my friend Romeck and Bill Tobin. So I'll go over who these gentlemen are, how we came to this conversation, and set up the context for the dialogue, which was awesome, in a moment. So first, some housekeeping. If you are interested in checking Circling out, all the links for the current courses that are available are below. We have weekend intensives and open events every Thursday night, and as well as practitioner trainings, which are the Art of Circling, which is like 9 months long. So all of the links for that are below in the show notes. And if you are interested in working with me on a coaching basis, please email me, and my email's provided below. All right. So I'm really excited to share this conversation with you, and it came about when Romeck, who's a friend and colleague of mine, told me about this guy Bill Tobin, who's an author, who I'll read his biography. I'll read both of their biographies so you can get a more of a concrete sense of where they're coming from and what they're about. And so he really wanted us to talk and meet, and so I figured, well, given the nature of the conversation, it'll probably be like all the conversations that I have here on YouTube. So they agreed to have put it on my YouTube channel. So this is what you're listening to, and it's such a warm, insightful dialogue that was clearly just the beginning. And so time flew on this one. I hope you really enjoy it. But here is the biography. I'll start with Romeck. So Romeck has worked as a psychotherapist, coach, and trainer since 1996, and as a supervisor and consultant since 2002. He specializes in enabling teams of people, individuals, and couples to find their creative edges, the edge of learning where transformation takes place. Because he believes not only in a person's intellect, but also his or her whole being is touched by the experience. Romeck originally trained in body-centered and transpersonal psychotherapy in the Netherlands and Germany. He also studied supervision, mentoring, and coaching in the United Kingdom. He has designed and facilitated a number of training programs in counseling and psychotherapy, as well as a 2.5-year training program on supervision, mentoring, and coaching in Slovakia. His program was the first of its kind in that country. Apart from designing and training programs in experiential learning, Romeck is also an expert in gender communication and knowledge management. He drew on his expertise when working with NGOs in Southeast Asia. Romeck has also devoted time to work related to trauma and post-traumatic stress, and he has facilitated many seminars focused on relationship and communication skills. He is currently involved in a leadership development program of VBNK, an organization that serves facilitators of development in Cambodia. I'm not sure if this is the most recent bio of him, but that gives you the gist of, the world that he comes from. And now, here is Bill's biography. Bill Torbert has spent his career leading counseling, teaching, and research based on a new paradigm of collaborative developmental action inquiry, applied to personal, organizational, and scientific development. At this point, which is 2020 when it was written, Torbert's theory of adult development and leadership is is the most well-known of the three, having generated the global leadership profile for measuring a person's current leadership capacity and one of the top 10 leadership articles in the history of the Harvard Business Review. 7 Transformations of Leadership, 2005. Having received both his BA in Politics and Economics and his PhD in the Individual and Organizational Behavior from Yale, Bill served as founder and director of both the War on Poverty, Yale Upward Bound program, and the Theater of Inquiry. He also taught leadership at South Methodist University, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and then from 1978 to 2008 at the Carroll Graduate School of Management of Boston College, where he also served as a graduate dean. And in parentheses it says, the BC MBA programs ranking rised from below the top 100 to number 25 during his tenure, and later served as director of the Organizational Transformational Doctoral Program. So in addition to, it just keeps going on, but he's also quite a prolific author. His latest book is called, what is it called here? It's called Numbskull, The Theater of Inquiry. And he's written other books such as The Action Inquiry, The Power of Balance, Personal and Professional Organizational Transformations is another one, Eros Power. Tons of books. So I will put the link to his site, Everything Bill Torbert, in the show notes below. All right. Enjoy. So, welcome everybody. I'm excited that we made this happen. We had a few scheduling hiccups a couple of times, so there's been anticipation and build-up to this conversation, which has afforded kind of a bubbliness. I mean, specifically a bubbliness, because what I take to be the reason why we're together and what the interest is that we'll be circling around is something like the transformational power of inquiry of some kind, of relating of some kind, and that's something that just deeply fascinates me myself, and is kind of like the theme. If there's a theme that goes through all of my videos and my career and all that stuff, it's that particular mystery of this strange thing called conversation, this awkward, weird thing called language and conversation and relationality that can seem to do everything from cover everything over and make us forget that we even exist, to destroy us, to realize everything from realizing the oneness of everything. And I'm like, something's powerful about that. What is that, right? Mm-hmm. And so, that being the case, I started talking to Romeck, and he's like, hey, I want to get the three of us together. We got to get the three of us together. And you talked about Bill and the work that you're doing, and you connected the work that he does with circling, which is something that you and I both do. And so you were really excited about that. And so I'd love to hear, let's start it off by you just sharing with us first who you are, and what has you excited about this, and why do you want us to come together?
I'm unspeakably thrilled about bringing the two of you together. I've been really anticipating it tremendously over the last couple of months, and the fact that we had these sort of scheduling blips just in a way deepened my sense of anticipation. Just to introduce myself very briefly, Romeck van Zeijl from the Netherlands. I have a background in psychotherapy, and for the last 10 years I've been very much involved in creating transformational learning journeys for people inside organizations in a great many different countries and contexts. So that enthusiasm and that passion about what is it that makes transformation possible, and discovering over those years, if there's one thing that became profoundly clear to me, is the power of shared inquiry, the power of having conversations that have that element of we are exploring something together, and we are using our present moment experience to get to greater level of depth. And that is what I see in your work, Guy, because the practice of circling has had a tremendous influence on my life and my way of relating to people, to my partners, to my clients, to my friends. It has transformed me, and links up a great deal with the Ridwan work, which is a kind of community of first-person inquiry mostly. So circling, the Ridwan work, and then I stumbled on Bill's work. I read the Numbskull book, and I kind of fell in love with the person who wrote this book, although I had never met him. One thing I love about the book is that Bill has put his whole life in the service of, at least in my impression, of exploring this power of shared inquiry and how it can be used to transform self, society, business. And unlike any other author I've ever come across, Bill shares about in his own learning journey, his successes and his failures in such an incredibly transparent and vulnerable way, and makes, he shares himself in the book. And I've never come across any author that is so powerful in his impact on the world and engaged with the world and sharing his science and speaking about himself.
Yeah. So there's
so that's why I think that bringing the two of you together.
There's like a philosophical and almost academic rigor to him. At the same time, within that rigor, he still shares himself personally a great deal.
Yeah. He makes
that is rare.
He draws no line between inquiring into the inner world and inquiring into the outer world, and actually integrating the two is such a meaningful part of his work in my view. Right.
So is it fair to say that in your experience he integrates it in his work by being an example of it in his very writing?
Totally. In his writing and in the way he lives his life and conducts his relationships. There's an incredible integrity about it to me in that writing.
That sounds super inspiring and rich, and it has me think of Socrates.
Well, I had as I look back on it, a sort of remarkable good fortune to get into some terrible trouble right out of college when I was trying to figure out what I should do and who I should be. And in the same year, when I was about 22, I entered the Gurdjieff work, which was a tremendous first-person impact on me over a quarter of a century. And I began to get engaged with encounter groups of various kind, the Esalen kind and the Bethel Maine kind and the Tavistock kind. And that was the sort of second-person inquiry.
This in the 60s?
This is in, yes, in the late 60s, right. I was
right smack dab in the human potential movement.
Right there in the midst of the civil rights problems and difficulties, and which became a part of my life because I started Yale Upward Bound, a war on poverty program for mostly Black kids, and who didn't want to be in school in the year, much less in the summer. So what we were going to do together, and that was that, and I started graduate school in individual and organizational behavior. So I had first person, second person, and third person. I didn't have these little names for them at the time, but I've ever since, you might say, I've been trying to integrate the three. Almost no one else is very interested by that. I find, especially not in academia, the people who are more humanistic and interested in individual and organization development tend to not be very good academics, and they sort of hate the third person rigor, and numbers are the enemy. And that wasn't true for me. I, in fact, have spent 40, 50 years developing a psychometric instrument of all the dry things to do that purportedly measures our action logics, which is what other people call stages of development. I call each one an action logic, and so the measure is an attempt to measure a person's action logic. But not only are we interested in doing that in a credible way, scientifically, but to use it, to feed it back to people, to create a transformational process of which that measure is a small part. Right. And so we ask people to make their own estimates of their action logic before we give them the feedback on the third person analytic measure. And then we offer them a coach to have a second person experience where the coach may be able to give feedback based on the here and now experience of the debriefing section. So people get a chance to estimate their action logic by three different methods, you might say.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So it sounds like the first, second, third person in their corollary relationship is pretty central.
Yes, it is. I mean, and I've developed a developmental theory which is analogous across individual development, organizational development. Obviously, it's different, but it's analogous stages, and science itself. So that I've tried to suggest how behaviorism represents an action logic, and what I call Gestalt psychology, sociology, and anthropology. That's a paradigm of social science and empirical positivism and so forth. So the latest thing that's come along has been trying to communicate that developmental theory of science itself.
Right.
But all three are kind of coordinated with one another. Like that.
Not an easy thing to do. Not an easy thing to do, and I would imagine. Well, I'll ask you. I could imagine pushback from all three positions, right? About integrating all three positions, right, in their own unique way. Have you experienced that?
Absolutely. Maybe the most dramatic instance of it was when I asked my longtime dear friend, senior Donald Schoen, which may be a name you've heard of, I'm not sure. He was a professor at MIT, and along with Chris Ardress, did a lot of work on reasoning in action. And I asked him to write a foreword to an earlier book in 1991 called The Power of Balance, and which had an autobiographical midsection in it. It started out with sort of third-person theory, and then a middle section that was first-person and autobiographical. And he didn't write he said he would, but then he didn't write the foreword until the day before it would have been too late to include it in the book, when he sent it to the publisher, but not to me. And the publisher faxed it back to me on New Year's Eve and said, "You can't run this thing because it's an incredible attack on you." The second sentence says, "This is a work of shocking grandiosity." I believe that's what he said. And he had some other criticisms as he went along. He was really upset by the first person elements in the middle. He saw that as, completely unscientific, whereas I was trying to show how it interplayed with the organizational aspect of what I was doing and with measuring whether we were succeeding or not. So yes, I have encountered surprising at the time, but then later, of course, kind of statements.
That's not a mild pushback. A day, the day everything needs to be put in, you find out that the very foreword is the guy who wrote the foreword is directly attacking the validity of your work. That's intense.
Well, I swallowed a bunch of times before deciding to include it, and I swallowed a bunch of times after deciding to include it. But in my idealistic way, I thought this is what science is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a confrontation of different perspectives within a community of inquiry.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it got a very good review in one of the major journals, so maybe that offset the introduction. But there hasn't been a lot of imitation of my approach so far.
Right.
I just want to say this story is, to me, this is so you, Bill. It says something about your uniqueness, that you actually chose to include the foreword in your book. It shows your commitment to include all perspectives. And that really moves me, That's so deeply inspiring to me. And I just want to say one more thing about the link between your work and circling, if I may, Bill. Where, for instance, in the conversations that happen between the person who has read your assessment, your measurement, and then sort of becomes a coach, a developmental coach to you, the conversations that take place in that debrief are conversations that in which I experience a kind of depth of connection and like really shared.
Lost your sound.
Your assessment.
Oh, there we go.
Pardon?
For a minute, we lost your sound.
Okay.
We can hear you now. Can you go back a sentence?
Yeah. What was I saying? What was the last thing you heard?
Well, you were talking about the connection between Bill's work and circling.
Yeah. In the
something about depth of connection.
The conversations that one has with the debriefer of the measurement, that those conversations have a kind of unusual depth that I've only ever experienced in circling. And it's really very much a quality of the quality of shared inquiry is in there. And this practice that Bill teaches of that he calls action inquiry, that looks into this moment, and that's another thing that it has in common with circling, that it invites people very much to bring the experience of this moment of relating to each other in contact with the topic that we might, the leadership or organizational topic we might be exploring. And so I feel there's a potential there for action inquiry on its side to be deepened by some of the circling methods and circling moves and the whole attitude that's behind circling, that it can enhance that, and that some of those things are learnable and transferable and scalable. And that on the other side, circling might kind of start to have more of an influence. Like there are some very deep and important things in circling that I believe in, about this extraordinary quality of second person inquiry. I think circling can enhance third person inquiry, third person action inquiry. And I think action inquiry methods can help circling start to have more impact on the world of leadership and organization. So that's part of why I feel so excited about bringing the two of you together.
It's a real
potential. And having fallen into saying a few things about my background and how I got into this leads me to want to ask you, Guy, for a little sense of how you became who you are, or
Yeah. Real bad.
By the way, I've looked at a bunch of your stuff on your website, so I feel like I'm familiar with your method and your presence in situations like this, but not your background.
Totally. Yeah. So for me, I kind of thought, in a certain sense, I found myself in the midst of all of this. I was in art school. Like I was born in Chicago. To two amazing parents and a really amazing grandfather. And unfortunately, there was a lot of addiction in our family. And so various, all the stuff that could happen with that, and the trauma and the breakups and the chaos, right? And the ensuing consequences of that. I definitely experienced a lot of that. And for me, kind of where all of this really started, I would have to probably go back to, I would say I had a grandfather that kind of, it's funny, out of all of the cousins and people in our family, my grandfather, who was this extraordinary man, was kind of like, and he collected everything and he traveled everywhere and he was incredibly creative and he did all these things. He was kind of, what do you call it, like a Renaissance polymath almost, or something like that, right? From Hanover, Germany, and came to America in 1928, and he was a world-renowned tailor. Started Hoff Cleaners. His last name was Hoffmeister in Hinsdale, Illinois. And while all of the the craziness was going on with my parents, my grandfather just basically picked me to basically pour himself into me. I got that phrase actually from Paul Vanderklay, who's a pastor, another person I've been in a dialogue with. He talked about that. He's like, yeah, your parents, your grandfather literally poured their life into you. And I really had that sense, but specifically when I think back on it, in a period of time where my, everyone was trying to get me to read, and I had all kinds of learning disabilities, and I was shipped from school to school, and all of this structure trying to get me to pay attention. And I had my grandfather would pick me up from school, and he would I would have a whole stack of papers that I had to get signed, because I had to, not watch TV or whatever, and do the homework. And my grandpa would take this and he'd just throw it on the couch, and he's like, all right, what do we want to do? And wherever my interest or my imagination went, he just was game. And it didn't matter if if I got glue on the floor, or I like tore something up, or there was something he was tuned into with me that I've come to really appreciate as I've gotten older. And because him recognizing my own sense of wonder, right? I think really, one, he had an enormous sense of wonder, and he was able to like recognize that in me, and in some sense educe it out of me, at least support it, right? And that was like a beacon in a dark time, right? That was like a light, a little light, right, in all of that. And then my parents got sober, and they couldn't say sober in Chicago, so we moved to a little town called in Arizona called Cottonwood. It's this little kind of trailer park town, right? Which was,
how old were you?
I was like
that
12.
point?
I was 12.
Oh.
Yeah, and I experienced this. I would say this experience of, well, of course, I didn't have the conceptual understanding at the time, but like I've come to understand that what was really happening was I was leaving my grandparents, right? It was like leaving the ground of reality for me. And if there's, I think they say in AA, the only thing worse than a wet alcoholic is a newly sober one, right? So like here, both my parents are newly sober. They've just lost the family business. It's all of it went up their nose, all this catastrophe, lost all their money. We get this little like old station wagon and put the belongings we had left in our car and like go off to Arizona. And at some point the bottom dropped out. And I would say for about 3 years, I experienced a repeated bouts of this on the web. Repeated bouts of a kind of existential anxiety that was just so confusing for me. And so like all the horizons, it consumed all the horizons. And because I felt so scared of my parents, I didn't talk about it with anybody. And it turned into kind of all kinds of like repetitive, obsessive compulsive thoughts. Like I think about it now, it's like the ground like went away, and like I had to kind of build a cognitive raft. And at that time it consisted of like obsessive thoughts about death and about, like getting into these role-playing games over and over and over again, kind of negotiating whether or not I was going to die or not, and all kinds of crazy stuff. And that I didn't understand, nor did I feel safe to talk about it with anybody. However, during that time, and this is a really big part of my life as well, my parents, commend them because they really threw themselves in their recovery. Like they really got involved in AA and 12-step kinds of things. And so that introduced a whole group of people in my life that were there's a lot of really, 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 really wise, deep people in Alcoholics Anonymous and 12 steps, right? A bunch of people just went through the eye of the needle, barely made it, right? And lived to tell about it. And there was some
of my closest friends in life went through that. We've been so.
And I would say there was one, and this moment was, I've come to realize was like, I was like, oh, I think this is really where it's the circling part probably started for me, was out on our front porch, a group of either my parents were having, either there was an AA meeting going on out there, or it was just a group of their AA friends, their new friends were out there. But I went outside and I just sat down I started to like listen into the conversation, and it was a conversation unlike I had ever heard before.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think especially in Chicago, like Midwestern, like the Midwest is known for just talking about the vacuum cleaner for like 3 hours, right? Just idle talk like crazy. But I had my first experience of dialogue, of genuine dialogue that wasn't about, in some sense, having the context of covering something up, right? But had the opposite of that, of wanting to unconceal something that was hidden, looking for what was hidden, looking for what was concealed, inviting it out, like the context of that. And I could feel the difference of that, right? And it was, I don't remember what anyone said, but I just remember the world that created. And it occurred to me like it was a different world. And I think that as, you know, as I'm kind of like having these bottom dropping out experiences, I was like, my little 12-year-old brain was like going like, okay, whatever's going on in this world, right, may have something to do with what's going on here. There's a connection here. And so, in a positive way. And so I just instinctively, essentially went into that world, and I basically haven't come out, right? And I think precisely, you know, looking back, it was this experience. Two things is like that. I think I got in that moment that a conversation can create a world. It can make a world, right? And with a whole different kind of physics to it, right? And that possibility kind of, I think I got that at a visceral level right away, right? And so all of my friends growing up, I'd go to high school, and I have my friends at high school, but all my real friends were much older than I was when I get off of school. And then I go and hang out with, you know, various kind of philosophers and old guys. And I had a real, like my whole teens were filled with various men and women who essentially, kind of like my grandfather, right, kind of noticed me and took me under their wing and listened to me and saw me. And I've come to realize that I think part of that was, there was a listening there's a kind of listening that I had developed, right, that people could recognize. And it seemed to draw out what was most wise in people, right? And so, like, I think that there was something about me as a teenager, right? This little kid that was really intriguing for people, where I could hear someone's wisdom and I'd be drawn to them. And here's this little teenager, right? Like profoundly listening to me. And there was this kind of sense in which they could just pour themselves into me. And I just developed a lot of real close mentor-like relationships that really defines my whole teenage years growing up.
Amazing.
That's kind of the pretext for, then we go forward into, I go to art school. I moved from Arizona to art school in, I think, 1994, I think 93 or 94. And I was like 22, I think, at that time. And I think it was my second year in art school, I met Jerry Candelaria, and he introduced me to a whole world of people that were even deeper than the people I had known, right, in the 12-step stuff with my parents. And they took LSD and had all these wild experiments and, you know, experiences, and that opened my eyes to that world. And through that, and an experience at Burning Man with my friend Jerry, through just basically dealing with the conflict that had erupted in the group, And Jerry and I getting really interested in the conflict. We end up out in the middle of the playa in this kind of weird teepee art installation, and we both got interested in the conflict. But very soon the dialogue left the level of the conflict and what opened up the two people as it opened up underneath it. And then the two people, in some sense, it revealed who that person was at a deeper level, right? But also even like what it was that even had them be that way, right? All the way down to the deepest aspect of their being. And everyone just started to speak that back to them, right? This experience of seeing just the deepest depth of another, right? And speaking it back and being deeply impacted by that, right? And we went, and it just spontaneously just happened all around, like one by one. I think there was, I don't know, 8 of us or something, maybe 7, 8 of us. And it just spontaneously just went around the whole thing. 12 hours later, we come to, and Jerry and I are walking away from this experience, right? The sun's coming up now, and Jerry's like, "Hey, that's it." And I was like, he didn't have a word. And I was like, yeah, that we didn't have a word for it at that time. But I think what we said is whatever that was deep and profound in a way that was unlike or distinct from all the other deep, profound things that we were doing at the time. Like that glowed something. That like, what was that? And then kind of in this, at that moment, you could say we recognized that mutual recognition. We just spontaneously brought our hands out and then shook hands and committed to it. We had no idea exactly what we were committing to, but I remember both of us felt all right, whatever that is, we're going to just dedicate everything to it. We're just going to make this happen, right? And out of that handshake was the beginning of a whole process that which later would be called circling. And I often talk about, and this involves a lot of people, like a lot of people, right, involved in shaping this and discovering it and seeing it and going through it. But in some sense, the horizon that opened up there, right, whatever was beyond that horizon, right, drew us forth. And for me, very much, I would say that what circling is for me at the deepest level is still discovering what opened up there. Like there's an opening, right? There's some kind of horizon of inexhaustibility, right? And some kind of sense of moreness that happens through relation. And I've been trying to understand that, get closer to that, being drawn to it, fascinated by it, right? And just that process, right? There's of just trying to, what was that? Years of doing that left language trails and distinctions and ideas and methods, and we could write books about all of the different facets that came out through that. As a result of that. But really, for me, at the deepest level, what circling is asking that fundamental question of what is this thing that you can't quite put a word to, yet it's revealed in and through our relationship together, yet it's beyond both of us, yet requires us an intimacy that is unreasonable in the greatest sense of the word.
You've written a lot about intimacy too, Bill.
Right. Well, that's the word that I caught just at the end there. That seems very central to me too. I feel like with teams that I work with, with women that I love. It's the search for intimacy in its deepest sense that is motivating me. And what I mean, and the mystery of what that actually is. And
yeah, what have you come to about that mystery?
Well, I'm not sure I've come all the way yet, but one aspect of it is cultivating a sense of mutuality. I mean, that you can't have true intimacy and not have mutuality. Now, that's confusing in a sense, because there's a different kind of mutuality between a mentor and a mentee, let's say, than between a man and a woman of his own age. But even when there is a hierarchical element to the starting relationship, where it's going is towards mutual intimacy. If I'm to be interested by it. Right. And I had a wonderfully, relatively intimate relationship with this guy, Chris Ardress, who was a very famous action researcher in his day. And he was my advisor in doctoral program. And then later, after I'd gone down to SMU for a few years of teaching, I came up to Harvard. He had moved from Yale to Harvard, and we were colleagues. And I thought we were really mutual. But then we suddenly ran into trouble in a wonderful, epic way, in which a graduate student said he wanted to do a thesis on learning to trust. And he was going to use Chris's work, and he was going to use my work at that time, and other people's, Martin Buber, I Thou, and he wrote this qualifying paper, which you wrote at Harvard before you did your thesis, and I and somebody from the divinity school both gave it honors, and Chris failed it, and he hated one of the examples in the student's paper where a Jewish theologian and a Christian theologian are arguing about whether Jesus was Jewish or Christian.
Right.
One of those foolish but important arguments.
Yeah.
And they were across the room, and they were their voices rose, and they were really pounding one another.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they entered this moment of silence in which they were eyeing one another, and they rushed towards one another and hugged. And he was using this incident as a kind of illustration of how developing trust is not merely an intellectual process; it's an embodied process. Yeah. And Chris hated this. Well, you can't know for sure. What were they just avoiding their conflict? How could you tell for sure? And we said, well, you can't tell for sure, but it's not meant to be scientifically certain. It's meant to provoke you into the possibility of such a thing. So he wrote the paper again, and we both gave it honors again. Chris failed it again, and I had to go and confront him and take him off the committee and put somebody else on it. And the sense of mutuality in our relationship never recovered, even though we had 4 long lunches at the Harvard Business School dining room, which is one of the best restaurants anywhere. Yeah. I hate the Harvard Business School, but I love their dining room.
Right.
But we couldn't make a dent on one another. I mean, we fought and didn't get anywhere. And there were another 20 years of attempts to resolve the conflicts, which were unsuccessful. But So that's yeah, that's intimacy not quite achieved across
Yeah.
across
Yeah.
here.
So there's, it's funny because I know, you mostly, if you ask anybody in their life and you ask them about like the most formative moments or the things that were the most impactful to them, where they felt the most real or felt reality the most. Oftentimes it's what you're going to hear described are relationships with people, right? It's like some experience like of deep love or loss, or some profound conversation you have with a teacher, like that there's this, it's just this interesting thing about intersubjectivity I've noticed is that you're right, it defies scientific certainty, right? However, it's, if you ask people about their most contactful, well, places where they felt like they contacted the most real, they're going to talk about that. Like there's this different kind of certainty of whatever it is that we just did, that was real, right?
Right.
But
I
it's
call it immediate validity. Immediate
Yeah.
validity. In other words, it's simultaneous with the act.
Yeah.
It's incontestable validity at the moment.
Yeah.
It may not last. It may not last as a relationship forever, but it.
Yeah. But I think I would imagine, however, where maybe what can be measurable, and I'm just, this is a question actually, is I would imagine you can maybe measure the possibilities that open up, that through those interactions that one starts to take actions in, right? Like, yeah.
And I think, people at the later action logics are more committed to this kind of quest. And so, ultimately, we measured 10 different CEOs, 5 of whom were at later action logics and 5 of whom were at early action logics. Conventional versus post-conventional would be another way of distinguishing.
Right.
And what happened to their organizations over a period of 4 years. And we found that that whether the organization successfully transformed, sometimes more than one time, because we were with them for quite a long while, versus those that stayed the same, or even in one case declined, with, it turned out, the earliest action logic leader, the correlation and the total number was only 10. So you'd expect it very hard to find a statistically valid result. But in fact, it accounted for 59% of the variance beyond the 0.01 level of probability. So that's my ultimate connection between third person numerical quantitative research and sort of the first person state of a person. And the second, and the capability, I mean, the late action logic CEOs are all about eliciting feedback in the midst of their performance and giving important feedback in the midst of their performance. So the second person element is very important. They're trying to develop trust with their team so that more people can take more initiatives and get things right closer to the action, rather than having abstract decisions from on high, which percolate through to the lower levels. So you have a Russian army where the soldiers don't know what they're doing and why they're there.
What were you going to say?
I felt an impulse to insert something, or to respond to what you guys were saying, that that kind of also again creates a link between action inquiry and Bill's work and circling. And that's that, you were talking, Bill, about incontestable validity that kind of emerges in the dialogue. And it's very much a mutual process whereby we are both transformed by that which emerges in the conversation that actually changes us.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that happening in action inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that happening a lot in circling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would you say is, from your vantage point, what would you say is the through line, right, between the two things? What's the difference that makes that difference that is both in action inquiry and in circling? Do you sense a through line?
Well, one through line that I see is that how action inquiry is different from other approaches. For how I have understood it, Bill, is that it's not about simply reflecting on the past and then trying to make a strategy for a better future, but it creates transformation through paying attention to the present.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And actually picks up that, is interested in that moreness, that which is hidden, and is presencing that into the conversation. So I see a through line there too, like circling and action inquiry do it in different ways, but what I want to stress is that action inquiry recognizes that speaking and language and asking questions is action.
Right.
And that's what I see in circling too, that actually the speaking of something is the transformative action, or can lead to a decision about timely action, which is another important part of action inquiry.
Right.
But it not only creates that relational emergence where I believe real development happens, like I'm saying, how incredibly relational real development and transformation is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this doesn't mean too much, but I once drew up a quick diagram of what were the kinds of research that were possible within the scope of action inquiry. And so I had on the x-axis was first person, second person, and third person practice. You could study any one of those. And then on the y-axis was first, second, and third person voice. You could speak about it in any of those three ways. And then there was, this could all be in the past, it could be in the present, it could be in the future. So it turns out that the middle box of this construction is second person voice on second person practice in the present. So that middle box, which is in a sense the core of action inquiry, it sounds like to me, is what you call circling. I mean,
right. And so just so for people who aren't familiar with the axes and stuff like that, what would that look like in a concrete way? Like if somebody was doing the thing you just described there, that you're saying is what sounds like that's what circling is.
Well, yeah, like a way that it happens and has happened in my work, say, is I'd be a consultant to one of those 10 organizations, and I'd be working with the senior team, and I would say to them, we can create a strategy for the future, which is great. That's why they asked me to come in. But the strategy is going to be meaningless unless your senior team can implement it, can work together, can take care of things when they aren't working, and so forth. And so they would agree that they would work on that. And then I would among other things, I would interview each of the members of the senior team, and I would ask them all sort of tricky questions like, who do you regard on the team as not coming up to your standards of what a good team member would be? And then I would ask, is there anyone else on the team who thinks you don't come up to what the team should be? And so there were all these cross-cutting questions, and usually there would be someone who would be the biggest problem on the team, who everybody was stumbling over. Now, the person wasn't always a beast, although sometimes they were. They were like an interpersonal beast. They ruined trust every time they opened their mouths. But there were also cases where it was somebody who was at a later stage of development who was taking initiatives and asking questions that were uncomfortable for the other people. Well, we'd come together and we'd talk about what they had said, and then it would be voluntary if people wanted to present the feedback they'd received to discuss it. And I gave them the feedback from the other people in their words. I never put a quantitative thing on it, but somebody would say, "This guy is an interpersonal beast." That's a quote from what somebody said. And I would talk with that person a little bit before, and I'd say, I think it's going to be a great advantage to the team and to you if you're willing to volunteer first in this circle. And, they would, and I would say, well, this is what it's about. And then they would speak first. And of course, that just opened up the whole thing. Everybody else became willing to talk. The very fact that they talked changed their relationship with the team. But then, people gave them more feedback. So that things that were not discussable with the beast, everything became discussable with the beast.
Right.
And the beast himself acknowledged that, that was all kind of defensive behavior on his part because people didn't like him, and so forth. So, I mean, that's...
I could see how that was really transformative.
It really, in a number of cases, really was, both for the person and for the team. And
on the border, I could see it risking a lot. This is always the case with intimacy, right? If it's not risky, it's really kind of hard to say it's intimacy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not risky. It's not intimate.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's some real truth to that. You can. I mean, if you reach a level of intimacy with somebody and then you just stay at that level, well, it actually becomes less intimate gradually,
right?
Because so there is something true, I think, about that. That there has to be a continuing risk. I mean, obviously, there's a timing to that. People need to digest. They've taken big risks, and there needs to be a period for digestion. And I'm usually not very good at seeing that side. I'm ready for the next risk in my relationship with somebody, and then they feel a little overwhelmed. And one of the big things for me is learning to just hold back on that risking. If we've been already through a history of significant risking, just
you have an
give it a little time.
You have an unusual, inexhaustible hunger for the novelty that opens up. That's one of the things I find just really terrifying about intimacy and exciting is it's like I've come to realize that when I say the thing that's hard for me to say, which is usually some sense of risking, like it's if we say that there's two existential drives, right? One is like belonging and the other one is autonomy, right? And it's in those moments where if belonging risks my autonomy or my autonomy risks my belonging, it's those moments where when we speak, that's where the risk feels. And if we can't tolerate that anxiety, right? And I think the way we non-tolerate the anxiety of intimacy seems to be like we dissociate or we dominate. Like it sounds like that one person that you're describing, probably he dealt with the anxiety by, dominating and, being a brute or something. or we submit, right, and just say yes, or we stay and say it. But what's really the thing I've noticed about that is that there's all my fears that I can kind of imagine of why I wouldn't say it, right? Or like there's all the known knowns in there. But almost every single time, whenever I've said it, it seems to open up a world beyond what I could have conceptualized before it, because it's by definition transformative, right? Like so like there are things that have happened that I should have been afraid of, but there was no way of knowing, right? Like the fear, because it's like a different dimension opens up, right? When you go into intimacy. So I'm imagining you have is it fair to say that you have a particular hunger and proclivity for that dimension opening up, where you're like, for other people, you gotta like, oh, I gotta hold back here a little bit and just give it some time and let it assimilate before we move the horizons again.
Right. I mean, I think that comes partly from, my father being in the diplomatic service and us moving around in my whole childhood. So I always lost my friends after 2 years. So I desperately wanted friends that lasted. That was one thing. And then at the same time, I was being opened up like you were by these conversations, like with Chris Argyris. He talked in a different way than other people, and it was his own special brand. And for about 10 years, I saw nothing but revelation in that brand. And then very gradually, I began to see there were limits on that brand.
Yeah.
And, and he didn't seem to be really, he never really wanted to be mutual with me. He was very happy being my teacher and being a very, very good student of his. But then when this guy in the Learning to Trust paper said that my theory recognized the embodiment aspect of learning to trust, and Chris's theory was purely cognitive, but very useful, but didn't go all the way, as this guy put it. And Chris wasn't eating that meal.
Yeah, got it. Totally. So that was a risk. So it was at a point for you, was that one of those points where, like, I would imagine moving in this direction where you're realizing it maybe goes beyond your teacher, right? 10 years of being, really deeply with this teacher, I would imagine that was quite intense.
Yeah, and I didn't, it was intense, and I didn't give up on the idea of our becoming intimate again.
Yeah,
and
really held that open.
Went through different, we did connect again, but when I was starting the Theater of Inquiry, which is part of the title of this numbskull book, it was a real thing that I ran for 2 years called the Theater of Inquiry. And I asked friends for contributions, but I knew better than to ask Chris. This was after our Harvard time. And but I called him up to let him know I was back in town because I'd been out in San Francisco for a year. And Don Schern had made a contribution, and he probably talked with Chris, and Chris thought that I was calling him to ask for a contribution, which I wasn't. But he was very judgmental about this thing that he had not seen or had any idea about, really, and just criticized the fact that I had left the university. And he said it was like a great violin teacher teaching fourth graders, which was an amazing statement. First of all, I had professors and psychotherapists and various people in this group. The assumption that he was making that these were all, because they weren't at Harvard, they were they couldn't be smart.
So he was really threatened. Would you say it sounds like he felt threatened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think so. And so I said at the end of that phone call, he said, the next thing to the end of the phone call, he said is, well, Bill, I'll be very open if you want to write a paper and share some data about this to reading your paper. And I said, I don't experience you as open at all, Chris. And I can't see any basis for continuing our conversation. So 4 years of not speaking to one another. This may be beyond that. Maybe I'm being self-indulgent here, but I'll just say one more thing, and which is that the way we met each other again was that I had gone to be the dean at Boston College, Graduate School of Management, and I had received tenure, and Don Schern took me to MIT to the faculty club for lunch as a kind of little mini celebration. And who should be sat down at the table right next to us after a little while, but Chris Ardress. And so Don says to Chris, who is close to it, you remember Bill Torbert? Well, of course he remembered me. We had it. And he said, Bill's, just gotten tenure as dean at Boston College. Well, Chris just was all smiles, and we must get together and talk again soon, Bill. So I'd come back to the conventional fold, and was no longer such a big problem. But there are further chapters to that story, but we'll let it go there.
Right.
Intimacy and non-intimacy.
Totally. So it's this embrace what I'm hearing is your work, it sounds like, really does embrace intimacy, kind of requires it sounds like, for it to thrive, right? And that embrace has distinguished you, well, to probably is a mild way of putting it, from a lot of the academic or scientific world. Your embrace of that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there were other people in the 60s and 70s. I mean, to a considerable degree, Chris's career was all about that, about creating these kinds of conversations. And, other people who worked in the area of group psychotherapy or stuff like that, who both wrote, and Irvin Yalom, is that a name you've ever heard of?
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. I just read his autobiography.
Yeah, I've read a whole bunch of his books in recent years, because he's one of the people who's sort of closer to, my way of working than most people in academia.
He's a kind of existential, like a real brought in a lot of existentialist kind of sensibility to it, which I really appreciate. Yeah.
There's a Socratic thread to all of this. It occurs to me in this moment, like definitely Socratic thread in the circling dialogos work, and the tremendous Socratic thread in all of your work, Bill.
Yeah, well, I loved the discussions I've heard on your website about Neoplatonism and so forth. It
so you got to listen to some of that. Okay, great.
Yeah,
what do you love about him? What's tell me about your experience of him.
Well, first of all, it defined for me what contemplation is, that I have always been vague about. Meditation, yes, but and that helped me to realize how I contemplate, to listen to that I have been contemplating, but that I didn't exactly know it. And that this going in, I mean, one of the things that I somehow learned to do was to plan events so that we got to this point of intimacy in an event that might not sound like it was that kind of event to begin with.
Little tricks there, bait and switch, Yeah.
Right. So I call these things liberating disciplines.
Yeah.
How you take a situation that is a kind of conventional situation,
Yeah.
and you get people to buy in to a much deeper kind of conversation.
Yeah.
And I realized that I could not plan these things by sitting down and planning. I would feel all sorts of resistance, and I would feel like the plan I was making was stale graham crackers. But then if I just stopped and meditated and cleared my mind, and then the way I say it is that it's like a small waterfall, and it's dripping possible ways of organizing this event that I'm considering. But I just watch it happen for a while. I don't like grab the first one. They're all good. There's this sweet flavor. These are connecting in a soulful, spiritual way to what we could do together in this meeting that's coming up.
Yeah.
And then finally something comes up that feels just right, and then everything else sort of flows from there till the meeting. So that I recognize that as related to some of these ideas about contemplation that I was hearing in that conversation.
Yeah.
Among
Everything
of you.
you just described there, totally. Like, just the sense of, well, what I heard you say is to be prepared, right? All the conventional ways of being prepared, having an outline, all that kind of stuff just didn't feel right. But rather having the Korban sense of the imaginal, right? Of seeing all the different threads that came up, as trickling down, right? Afforded you to not grab on any particular one, but at one point something would emerge that would be the direction that you take. So it's like that. It sounds more like a kind of a primordial attunement.
I think that's right. Sometimes I would use the developmental theories that I have to start to approximate. There's these people are mostly at the achiever level, but there's two transforming people, and the event we're trying to create is early in the history of the organization, so this will be the primary issue. But then that just creates a kind of a box of possibilities. And then it's what are the actual possibilities that start streaming from beginning to conceive of it that way. It's not just deducing what to do from the theoretical categories.
I love what you did, how you just talked with your hands in that moment, because I think I witnessed you kind of talk about, okay, so I do set it up. There are these theoretical things, and there's the issues coming up, and then you did this kind of movement with your hands, and then you said, but then you went up like this, and you went, then we start. Right, this kind of taking up, and was a completely different motion of like, this kind of sets up the frame roughly, but within that frame, the real thing happens, right? What was this? What do you say? This?
I don't know, but I see, as you say it, I'm reminded of how John, was it Vernacky?
Yes, Vervaeke.
That's how he talks. He does a lot of this stuff.
Totally. Right.
I don't know. I was in Italy for 2 summers, and I was very influenced by the allora che facciamo adesso.
Totally. Well, especially if you consider that gestures are extensions of cognitive space, right? Like whenever we use hands, we're using them to aid in extending and assisting and supporting. Like, so the more kind of at the edge or unarticulated what this idea that's emerging, right, the more you're going to use your hands to do it. So I've just noticed that, like, to listen to the gesture is actually pointing that out and listening to the gesture oftentimes is a place to access the edge of intelligibility and to bring it into light, right? Because it's like I'm consciously saying, but my hands are doing this. And then if you ask somebody, what were you doing when you were doing this, when you said that? Like, and they can go, and you can look at it yourself. And oftentimes they're surprised because it's something, there's something being said there that includes and goes beyond or deepens what was said with the mouth.
The mouth.
Yeah.
I had a friend who was an architect, but he was completely wild. This was in the years of much LSD, and he used to draw human characters. They're like robots in a way, but there'd be a head, and then there'd be a little line, and then there'd be a slightly thicker neck, and then there'd be a little line, and then the shoulder. There was like this human being who is really distended, and the parts are all it's unclear how they ought to be moving or can move, but
right.
How I feel. It's, it helps me to remember sometimes in my meditation. I just let all the different parts of me be separate. The feet really feel the sensation of the feet without, not from the outside, but from the inside, and so forth.
I'm really enjoying this conversation we're having a lot.
Me too.
It feels
feel well met.
It feels super alive. It feels super alive. What's happening for Romick? How is your how's it going?
The delighting in the unfoldment of the conversation, and then certain aspects of the conversation kind of stay with me a little, and so then I'm listening to where it's going, and at the same time, like, there was that piece, and I don't want that to get lost, or I want to. There's something to explore that I feel really curious about.
Yeah. What was one of those? Do you have?
Well, when you were mirroring Bill's gestures, that setting it up, and then this movement, and then it seemed like, Bill, you were describing a process in gestures that indicated an opening up, and then a sort of like settling down into the real. And that I'm somehow fascinated by. Also bringing it back to the sort of transforming power of conversations that I think you were kind of describing that almost more in the sense of how you were organizing these events, like setting up the conditions and then bringing people together, and then this transformational thing maybe sometimes did and sometimes didn't happen in the conversations, in the intimacy for which you had created the conditions. So I'm fascinated by that. I see how circling also does a lot to create these conditions, and then has certain kind of, I don't want to call them steps or methods or tools, but certain moves that create more connection, that almost consistently manage to just deepen the connection in the moment. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how we resist, how many people desire that and long for it, but then when the actual conversations happens, we make all kinds of moves that bring us back into sort of more safe, conventional levels of speaking with each other. And then how you and Bill, you both of you have I think a your ways of bringing it to a deeper level again.
Mm. Mm.
And I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but there's a sort of way again about how both can enhance each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And maybe I should just ask you, Bill, like when you were, what was happening there for you?
Well, it's unfair because now you've both said things about it. I didn't really have anything to say about it, but now I like what you said about it. I think that's right. That's what I was saying.
Yes.
Well, at least it's what I meant.
I could tell you the thing that just felt like it echoed what I think I'm getting about you through this conversation is there's like kind of set, you kind of went like this in terms of how you set up an event, right? There's a certain conventional sense of the known, but there's an attitude with it where like, that may or may not exist within the 2 minutes of opening this event, right? You set up these conditions and these distinctions, and then we engage and it goes up and then whoosh. It was really interesting because you said dropping it down to more of the real. And I was like, oh yeah, that definitely felt like I could definitely feel that. But one thing I felt was even before that it was a willingness to demolish all this. Like a willingness to like no sacred cows here or something, right? Of like, that's the thing I'm getting about you is a willingness to follow something, not being against structure, not being against any of this stuff. However, being abiding to and being in allegiance with what those structures support, right? That what they're in service of. And if they're not in service of it, like there's no, like nothing to hold on to here because this is the thing that's most real.
Right. And an additional way I would say it is that the structure that I create demands for its fulfillment that I be present in the moment during the implementation, and using the moments of the implementation as a reconnection with the fundamental vision of what's going on. And I'm thinking of a particular instance when I was at SMU, and we had this huge course with 400 people in it where we were teaching them to be sole entrepreneurs. How do you teach 400 people to be entrepreneurs? Well, we did it. They all were in teams, and we had consultants who worked with them, and the teams were involved in inventing projects and so forth. And when we started one of the courses, we had the students from the previous year come and tell them what were the business projects they actually created, which are kind of amazing. And then one of my colleagues, who was a more quantitative person, had done all sorts of research on the course and gotten students to respond what was going on the previous spring. And he started to present the results of his questionnaire and statistics. And you could immediately hear a small buzz growing in the auditorium. People weren't paying any attention. It was boring from their point of view. So I didn't like to, decapitate my partner. But after, a moment or two of agonized thinking about it, I interrupted him. And I said, Roger, I think you're missing the auditorium now, and we ought to try something else, go on to the next person so we can get reconnected. And he said, and the students, by the way, of course, immediately hushed the minute my voice interrupted his, which was an unusual thing, obviously, for faculty to do. So they shut up and were silent, were really listening. And then Roger started right up again and said, well, I'm just going to finish off the last few things and then we can go. And he started in again, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. And I'm sitting there, I can't believe this. And so I interrupted again, because obviously the whole thing was going to fail if we didn't handle this thing, which was at the core of what we were trying to be about, of sort of taking seriously the feedback that's coming in the moment, sort of. And Roger stepped down.
Yeah, that's I just want to highlight taking in the feedback that's coming in the moment. That seems crucial here.
Absolutely. Exactly. I mean, that's right. Part of being in the present, right? And it was amazing because we had students writing a single-page paper every week about something they'd experienced and how did they think about it and what theory applied to it. And 3/4 of the papers talked about these few moments from the first week, in terms of, suddenly I realized that there was something unusual going on. Nothing like this has ever happened at SMU before, people were saying. And it was like they recognized that it was sort of a dramatic historical moment in a sense. So that's, I mean.
Totally. And so on one level, what happened that was different was one professor interrupted another professor. And that just was like, on one level, that doesn't happen. That brings up eyes. But like what I'm hearing you say is, you weren't coming from the place of trying to interrupt him. You were abiding by something. You were in allegiance to something else, right? That made this, that normally this thing, you broke a rule, like a social rule, right?
Right.
A social rule, right? Not because you wanted to break that rule. It was because there was something more important going on. And it sounds like the thing, what I heard is one part of that thing that was important was the responding to what was actually happening, the feedback that was coming in. Say more about that in your work. That seems to be important. What's important about that?
Well, right. It's
first of all, am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah. Yes, I think so. And I'll just add a little bit more to that, because it'll maybe clear my mind for what you're asking me, which is that one of the major issues in my life has been an avoidance of conflict, a fear of conflict. And I spent years practicing, trying to find, getting over that. And then it would rear its head again. And I felt it at that moment, I don't want to create a big conflict here, but something else overrode both the social norm and my own personal norm. And that is an allegiance to a spiritual flow that is higher than the structural flow of mind. So all mental structures ought to be subordinate to it, but of course aren't. We're usually lost in the mental level. And, from the Gurdjieff work, I have this notion of what I've now come to call fourfold monism. Not monism, not dualism.
Fourfold monism.
Fourfold monism.
All right, here we go.
There are four. There's not a lot of people that would get excited about this. So the outside world, my embodied behavior, my thinking, and a quality of post-cognitive consciousness. The way that they become monistic is by our work as human beings to actually connect them to one another. So when we find them out of connection, we have a kind of obligation or desire to make them congruent. So that's just another way of saying that what I said before. But you wanted maybe another instance or another example.
No, I just tuned into just what you were valuing in that, and demonstrating valuing through being willing to have a conflict, right? Or suffer through someone's embarrassment or someone's defensiveness, or like there is something you were caring about that was deeper than those other concerns, which I'm sure your nervous system at least felt, right?
Right.
And it sounds like that what I'm hearing is that there's a stream of feedback, like that. It sounds like part of it is we're always in a world, and we're always in a response and being responded to by that world in an embodied way and in the moment, right? And that there's something in that stream or the immediate response, and that in this case, the presentation into the audience, that he wasn't tuned into, right? Or valuing or even seeing, maybe, right? And and you said,
I doubt he was hearing the commotion. I was totally engaged in his overhead slide in front of him and talking from it.
Totally. So but for you, this buzzing, as you talked about, was happening in the auditorium, was really valuable, because there's something in that buzzing or in that stream of response that I would imagine that you have found that when you open and include that leads to something worthy of actually paying attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, it's like a kind of poison, because it's a sort of proof that communication isn't happening. And if it continues this way, our effort in this course will be destroyed. We'll lose the very tentative belief that the students begin with, perhaps.
It signaled at that moment. It signaled the loss of communication, right? And so, because the communication, and in this sense that you're talking about, I'm getting the sense what you mean by communication is this mutuality, right? Back and forth, right? Of like being affected, right? And affecting in some sense, and being aware of the mutual affected, like the way that we're affecting each other on some level, as an indication of where we are and what's happening, as a way of revealing what's happening.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And inviting dissonance also when it is there, not ignoring it, not keeping it out, but saying, hey, this dissonance, this is part of the music. This has value. Right.
And maybe it's worth adding here, because it is very central to my way of thinking and conducting things, is that with that fourfold monism idea, there can be three different types of feedback. One is from the outside world to my behavior. That is, I just need to change what I'm doing slightly, and then we'll be back on track. Double loop feedback goes up to my structure, my assumption, or my plan, my cognitive assumptions of what we're doing, which may need to be changed. And which are, of course, much more difficult to change than just an action, because people have their ego bound up in that structure. So double loop feedback is hard to give, hard to receive usually. And then triple loop feedback goes to the fundamental purpose or aliveness possibility of our work together, what we intended to do. I need to change. I've lost contact with what we were intending to do. I need to reawaken to that. And that's, of course, both both the hardest to give and often is given without realizing it's being given, I think. In other words, the person offering the feedback, it's just part of what's going on, but for the person receiving the feedback, it's a revelation. It's that can happen. But in any event, those three types of feedback, to me, are very important. And in society in general, people have trouble even accepting single loop feedback. I mean, the market is a good institution to the degree that it sensitizes people to single loop feedback. We had a loss last quarter. We got to change. We got to do something a little bit different this quarter. But beyond that single loop feedback, there's almost no receptivity to double or triple loop feedback. Except in special conditions that a few people create.
So he's right. So this would be, so first loop is like, people aren't paying. I'm doing a presentation. People are a little fidgety. I adjust it. I acknowledge it, or maybe I bring my voice up and I ask questions instead, or something like that. So I make a small adjustment in response, right? And then people are paying back attention. I'm like, good.
Right.
Double loop,
exactly.
because that's single loop. So double loop would be they're not paying attention. This is greater than maybe what, so maybe what I'm hearing is that I'm doing this at all right now isn't what the feedback is I shouldn't be doing this in this way. Maybe I should be, up here like pole dancing or whatever. Like a change in my a change in my come from, a change in my strategy, I think is what you said. Right.
Right. So it might be turning to me and saying, Bill, I hear commotion in the auditorium. I have a feeling I'm losing the group. What do you think I ought to do? Doing that openly there. Or turning to the students and saying, I sense you're not engaged with what I'm doing. Can you perhaps come up with some questions you have about what happened last semester and what I know about that?
Or what assumptions are you making about this event, or what the audience is ready for, or what the potential is of this event?
Right. So, but a person can ask for double loop feedback, but it's rare.
And then triple loop feedback. Okay, say what triple loop feedback is again. That seems
triple loop feedback speaks directly to a post-cognitive consciousness, which most people are not aware of trying to engage in particular ever. And so it comes as a surprise. When I was 10 years old, speaking of your grandfather, had me thinking about my grandmother. And when I was 10 years old, we came back to Washington from overseas, and we went out to her little country place, which I'd never seen before, to see her. And I loved her. She was a wonderful person, and as this next incident will also show. And the door was open to her house, but she wasn't anywhere around. And we were kind of poking around. And I suddenly saw her completely still behind some bushes in a little opening space that was obviously one of her meditation spaces. I didn't know from meditation. So here was this human being doing nothing, obviously totally alert. But as I came closer with her eyes closed, what the fuck was going on? I mean, So that was a kind of triple loop feedback. I mean, I've never forgotten that moment. It introduced me to a world which is unending that I've been exploring ever since, in one sense.
Wow. Okay. Got it. So it's something like, what was the word you said? It's a triple loop feedback is a post.
It's from the outside world all the way to your post-cognitive consciousness.
What do you mean?
Can I say something about how? Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rick.
Go on. Yeah,
Oh,
can I say something
that
about?
I'm going to have to stop shortly. Oh, unbelievable! We just started.
Yeah, we did.
We only just got started. Let me try and say this quickly. The way I am understanding it, the triple loop feedback is it like in my head, it's translating itself a little bit where Otto Scharmer speaks about the thing that makes a difference, the biggest difference in what impact our leadership has is not so much what we do or not even how we do it, but the place inside us from where we are acting and like the quality of consciousness. So that's kind of what I'm hearing or how I'm understanding the triple loop feedback, that I am aware what place in myself am I coming from in this moment of relating to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And, you know, he and I spent about 7 years talking to each other about these kinds of things. So his you is a wonderful representation of what I've called fourfold monism. But we can,
yeah, interesting.
I don't know if you've come across theory, Guy. Maybe you have, but
yeah,
Otto Scharmer is the guy who created theory U.
Yeah, I'm really familiar with that. It's interesting because I was. It strikes me as this third loop. Is it fair to say that you can attune to that feedback at any moment? Is it the kind of thing where I can sit down and tune into that stream, right?
Yes. Well, yes, when you said you can tune into it at any moment, I mean, not everybody can.
Yeah.
Like, yes, it's possible. Right. It's possible to attune to at any moment.
Right.
It's always available.
But but it can be difficult. I mean, but one aspect of it is just simply to feel like I'm attuned to the whole situation. I'm not just in my little personal self.
Right. Right.
It's wonderful.
It seems like that now what a self even means at that level seems to be completely different from what it means down here. Right.
Well, that's what the developmental action logics are about, is how you gradually attune beyond the societal mental conformity level of understanding things. And you gradually realize that you want this other level to be part of every moment of your life. Because that's
how it's occurring to me right now.
Huh?
I'm like, that's how it's occurring to me, right? Like, you know, I'm like, let's just go to 3 all the time. And I want to, on your time, I know you have to go, Bill.
It can be, I have to go. So I'll just say, I'll give one more example of triple loop feedback, because it has been annoying me for most of my life. So once when I was in graduate school at Yale, one of my very good friends said to me one day, Bill, I don't know if I can trust you. Sometimes you seem like a monk, and other times you seem like a businessman. And I thought, what the fuck? I mean, I do want to be practical and a businessman, and I do want to be spiritual and a monk. So what the hell is wrong with that? And this argument started in my mind. And then I realized, well, he's saying that sometimes you're one, sometimes you're the other. If you want to be integrated, you got to get them at the same time. And so that's the kind of, has been a piece of triple loop feedback for me. I, of course, remembered it throughout my life, and it just makes me a little more alert to to remember it.
I like that example.
Right. So
yes, I have to go.
Yeah, no good talking with the both of you. Let's schedule another one. You up for it?
Great. I was going to say,
Bill?
Let's do a second one.
Okay, cool.
Wonderful.
We'll do that. We'll schedule over
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Guy. It's been wonderful to meet you.
Awesome.
Thank you, Romeck.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
Bye, both of you.
See you soon. You staying on a moment, Guy?
Yeah, I could stand for a second, and just a second though.
Sure. Don't want to keep you beyond, but how was it for you?
That was great. It's exactly why I want to have these conversations. To live. He's great.
He's such a lovely man. Yeah, I kind of
really tell. He's got so many different qualities.
I felt so blessed to have connected, because it was a really funny thing. I had read his book, and then somehow there was a chance meeting on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And Bill responded to something I had never would have expected him to respond personally to my reaching out. Like, you can just say, hello, I would like to connect.
Yeah.
And then I wrote to him and I said, oh, I'm so chill. I'm so psyched that you're responding, because I just read your book. And I've never, since I was a boy, experienced such a sense of feeling completely identified with the main character in the book, and feeling so involved. And that was kind of, and he responded to that. And then we started to kind of become friends. We had a circling session with him, which I led and which he loved.
Yeah.
And which I loved. And it was also, it kind of put me very much in this set mode for a bit of, now I have to be a really fucking good circler.
Great. Yep, there's a demand of it. Yeah. Nice. Thank you so much.
I love how it's evolving. Sorry?
Thank you so much for organizing and getting this together. Yeah, I can tell we're going to do a bunch of these.
I'm loving it. I'm feeling a great joy after sitting with the two of you.
Yay.
We'll schedule another one in a couple of weeks, maybe. Or how soon do you think?
So I can do it. I probably could even do it next week. But let's.
Next week I'm in England, but okay, we'll get it. Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.